We're going to talk about Jenkins X. You're probably wondering how I'm going to do that in 10 minutes, but we're going to do it. It really does take about 10 minutes to set up an entire Kubernetes cluster on your cloud platform of choice. It could be Google, Azure, or AWS. But we've already done that, so I'm going to kind of go over all the pieces and parts that are included with Jenkins X. If you're not familiar with Jenkins X, it's an open source project that CloudBees started in order to give you kind of an all-inclusive sandals resort for your CI/CD and your DevOps. And we'll look at the tooling, and then to add on to that, I've integrated it with other applications like Jira for issue tracking and agile project management and traceability. Back to our Git repositories. Again, I'm with GoTo Group. We do professional services and cloud services for companies. We basically help companies develop software better through best practices and tooling. So an overview of what I'm going to cover in 10 minutes is, obviously I mentioned CloudBees and Jenkins X. Jenkins X, the open source project itself, actually bleeds technology into Jenkins Core, or sorry, CloudBees Core. So a lot of the things you'll see today are actually part of Core as well. So when we talk about scaling, what I'm going to show you today, that's possible with CloudBees Core and DevOps as well. So we're going to talk about containers, Docker containers, cloud. In this case, we're going to be using Google Cloud in the GKE, or the Kubernetes engine. We're going to talk about container management with Kubernetes and Helm for deployment, and just a general DevOps overview of what Jenkins X provides, and then also how it can deliver value quickly. The cool thing about Jenkins X, it really pretty much blew me away, is how fast you can be off to the races doing best practices CI/CD in just a matter of minutes. With containerization. So the tooling that we're going to look at in this 10 minutes is Jenkins open source, which is part of the stack, Kubernetes, Helm, and Helm charts to deploy our containers and our applications. Docker, GitHub, we're using as our Git source control management, and Google Cloud, Jenkins X, and it also includes Nexus and also a monocular instance to view your Helm charts and your versions around Helm charts. And I threw in Jira in there because at GoTo Group, we help companies go from requirements to delivery. So it's not just about DevOps, it's about your agile process and linking that to the tooling and linking that to the actual delivery aspect of CI/CD. So basically what happens is your developers are coding as they would, and they're focusing on code and pull requests and code reviews, and which is important. That's what they should be focusing on. They should be worrying about the infrastructure and the dynamic aspect of Docker and the containerization. And then they're, based on their interaction with the repositories, there's going to be some build automation activities. There's going to be dynamic environments, there's preview environments, staging environments, and production environments. And these are all configurable things based on your Jenkins files and your Docker files. We're going to be using Docker images, obviously, and using different environments. And then production deployment is done with Helm onto using Kubernetes. So let's do this on the cloud. So basically, when you install Jenkins X, the only thing that you have to do is start running commands. And the first command that you're going to run is jx create cluster. That's going to create the cluster. You can say GKE, AWS, or there's an acronym for Azure, I believe. And that's going to, I believe now they actually support OpenShift as well, but it's going to create a 3-node cluster out on your cloud of choice, and you're pretty much going to be ready to rock and roll at that point. The other cool thing about Jenkins X is it's kind of like, if you're familiar with Ruby on Rails or Grails, you can create new application project templates or skeletons, essentially. So for example, here we're saying we're going to create a Spring application. In this case, my example that we're going to show today is going to be a Spring Boot application. So in order to create that application, instead of using the Spring template, I just say JX create Spring, and I wanted to include web and actuator, which are two common things for if you're going to do a web application. And what that does is it actually creates the application itself, and it includes a Jenkins file, a Docker file, and a Helm chart. So right off the bat, I have a CI/CD pipeline, and I'm doing containerization with my with my application. So let's go and take a look at what all this means. So when I ran that JX create cluster on GKE, this is what it did. It created this cluster on this project, Modern Pipelines. If I go into there, I can see all the details about the different nodes in the cluster. We can also see our workloads as you would expect. This includes the Jenkins itself. So Jenkins, again, we have a Monocular instance running. We have a Nexus artifact management repository running, and several other things, including the applications that I deploy through the CI/CD using the CI/CD pipeline. If we look at services, we can see all of the services. This also creates the Ingress controllers, the DNS, and everything so I can access the applications. So again, as soon as I ran that, it created all this on Google. I can look at it through the hypervisor on Google. And then if I look at Jenkins, as I log in, I can see that all my pipelines are here. The application I'm using as an example today is called Trail. So here's our application, here's all of our CI/CD. You'll also notice that there's a preview environment. So as I interact with the source code and I create a pull request, as soon as I create that pull request, a build gets kicked off and it deploys my application to what's called a preview environment. So we can actually look at the application and see what's going on, if there's any issues with it from a user perspective or a view perspective, as well as reviewing the code itself. So here's our application. It's just an example application about trails in Arizona. And this is running, as you see, this PR8. This is my 8th preview build that I've done, and here's the application. The other thing that I talked about earlier is you can also add additional applications. So it's not just the stack that you get with Jenkins X. You can add Jira. This Jira is running on a compute engine on Google. And if I were to look at, we're pretending we're having a sprint for the trail application, so we can look at our rapid board. A typical scenario would be that you would drag an item, a story, or whatever to start working on it. And then if we were to click in the details, I think I just have this open here, we have the traceability. So we see that we created 2 branches, we had 3 commits, and then when we did the pull request, the build kicked off, it did the CI/CD, and then deployed it to the preview environment, which we have. And then you can see the activity here on the Jenkins instance that's part of the Jenkins X stack on the cluster. So remember, all these applications are in containers. So this is just an example of how you can tie in additional applications into the Jenkins X stack. So here you can see that we've made the changes on GitHub, and eventually we did the pull request, which created the preview environment. Now if I were to merge this pull request, it's going to kick off a build and basically merge it into master. It's going to kick off a build from master, and then it's going to deploy it to a staging environment. So if we go back to Jenkins, we see that we have a couple of builds that just got kicked off, and they'll do their business based on the Jenkins file. So as I mentioned earlier, I know this is a lot of information in 10 minutes, but I'm trying to give you all that I can. So when I created this application using the command, it created the Jenkins file, so it already creates these different stages in the build process and how they're going to containerize the application and put it onto the cluster. It also created the Docker file, and also as well, it created the Helm charts. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to just having Jenkins open source, we also have the Monocular instance. So here we can see the Helm charts and the versions. So every time you do a build, it versions your charts, and you can obviously change those based on the needs of your application and the container that it runs in. And here you can see that it's running, and this is also, again, running in a container. And then also, like I said, the Nexus artifact management. So it's going to have all of your artifacts from Maven, in this case, a Java application. It's also going to version all of your artifacts for your application, your jar files, as you can see here. And that's pretty much, and you can see that the builds are succeeding, which is a good thing. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell as far as Jenkins X. And again, it's going to be part of Jenkins Core. It is part of Core. It's kind of like Fedora and Red Hat. The technology bleeds up into Core as they work on things and make things better. They're adding additional languages and support. I know they support Java, I think Ruby, and Go, and some other languages are going to be added for the bootstrapping of the different application types. And the last thing I want to mention is you can also import existing applications. So if you had an application that was a Spring Boot application that had never been containerized, you can run an import command, and it'll actually generate the Jenkins file, the Docker file, and the chart file to get your existing application ready to be put out into these environments that are running under Docker and Kubernetes. And I think, is that about 10 minutes? All right, thank you.